September 2025. Shenzhen, China. Toyota's relationship with BYD is no longer an experiment hidden inside a joint research company. It is visible in Toyota vehicles carrying Chinese battery technology into one of the world's most competitive car markets. For years, Toyota looked like the company that could afford to wait. Then China changed the timetable. The story did not begin with a dramatic signing ceremony in 2025. It began in July 2019, when Toyota and BYD agreed to jointly develop battery electric vehicles and the batteries that would power them. Toyota was the global giant that had made hybrids mainstream. BYD was a Chinese company that had started with batteries and built itself into an integrated electrification business. The two companies were still competitors, but they had reached the point where competing alone was becoming less useful than learning from each other. That decision mattered because the automotive industry was changing underneath them. Toyota had spent decades refining hybrid technology, manufacturing discipline, reliability, and global distribution. BYD had built a different advantage. It controlled much more of the electric drivetrain itself, including batteries, motors, and power electronics. In an electric vehicle, that difference is enormous. The battery is not just another component. It is one of the central economic and technological foundations of the vehicle. In November 2019, Toyota and BYD agreed to establish a 50-50 joint company for battery electric vehicle research and development in China. In 2020, that company became BYD Toyota EV Technology, headquartered in Shenzhen, with engineers from both sides working on BEVs, platforms, and related components. Toyota described the goal in practical terms. Combine BYD's EV competitiveness and development capabilities with Toyota's strengths in quality and safety. The partnership was not a takeover. It was not Toyota buying BYD. It was something more revealing. Toyota was choosing to put its engineers beside a Chinese EV specialist and learn how to build products for a market moving at a different speed. Then came the car. In 2022, Toyota introduced the BZ3, an electric sedan developed through collaboration between Toyota, BYD Toyota EV Technology, and FAW Toyota. The car used BYD's lithium iron phosphate battery technology together with Toyota's electrification expertise. Toyota said the maximum cruising range exceeded 600 kilometers under the applicable test cycle. The significance was not simply the range number, it was the architecture of the deal. A Toyota-branded vehicle was being created through a combination of Japanese automotive manufacturing and Chinese electric vehicle technology. That is where the headline about a historic BYD deal becomes more complicated. There was no single moment when Toyota suddenly surrendered to BYD. The shift happened through a sequence of decisions, each one exposing a little more of the new automotive balance of power. Toyota's own history makes the contrast striking. In 1997, it launched the Prius and became a pioneer of mass-market hybrids. Toyota had accumulated enormous experience in electrified vehicles long before most traditional automakers took battery EVs seriously. By the late 2010s, Toyota had sold more than 14 million electrified vehicles worldwide, according to its own corporate materials. But the center of gravity was moving from hybrid engineering towards software, batteries, charging, and fast product cycles. China was moving particularly fast. The Chinese market was not simply becoming another place to sell EVs. It was becoming a laboratory where consumers expected rapid changes in technology, connected features, pricing, and vehicle design. Domestic manufacturers were competing at enormous scale. Batteries were being developed and manufactured inside the same industrial ecosystem as the cars. Software teams, suppliers, battery companies, and automakers were operating much closer together. That ecosystem gave companies like BYD an unusual advantage. BYD's roots were in batteries. It entered the automotive business in the early 2000s and built a vertically integrated approach to electrification. Instead of treating the battery as a component purchased from somewhere else, BYD developed core electric vehicle technologies internally. That meant the company could make changes across the vehicle architecture without waiting for every decision to pass through a long external supply chain. Toyota understood the strategic value of that ecosystem, and the partnership began producing more than a single sedan. By 2024, Toyota was presenting additional China-focused BEVs developed with Chinese partners and local engineering structures. The company showed the BZ3C and BZ3X at the Beijing Motor Show and said both would be sold in China within a year. Toyota's own later reporting described the BZ3X, launched in China in March 2025, as a product developed under a locally driven structure, with Chinese customer feedback incorporated much closer to launch. That detail is easy to miss. The real story is not simply that Toyota uses Chinese batteries. The deeper story is that Toyota is changing how it develops cars. For decades, the traditional automotive model was relatively predictable. A global manufacturer could design a vehicle through a centralized engineering process, manufacture it across a standardized network, and sell it around the world with regional adaptations. The EV era is weakening that model. China is forcing automakers to respond faster because Chinese customers are comparing vehicles not only on reliability and mechanical performance, but on screens, software, intelligent driving features, interior technology, charging, and price. A company that takes 3 or 4 years to respond can lose an entire product cycle. That is why Toyota's collaboration with BYD matters geopolitically as much as technologically. The United States, Europe, Japan, and China increasingly view the automotive industry as strategic infrastructure. Batteries require minerals. Minerals require processing. Processing requires industrial capacity. Industrial capacity creates supply chain leverage, and supply chain leverage can become geopolitical leverage. The EV competition is therefore not simply Toyota versus BYD. It is a contest over who controls the architecture of the next automobile. China has built extraordinary capacity across that architecture. It is a major center for battery manufacturing, electric drivetrain production, materials processing, vehicle assembly, and increasingly software. BYD is one of the clearest examples because its business stretches across multiple layers of the electric vehicle system. For Toyota, working with BYD can therefore be understood as both an industrial partnership and a strategic adaptation. But there is a paradox. Toyota does not want to become BYD. Toyota wants to use what BYD is good at without giving up what makes Toyota powerful. Toyota's strengths are still immense. It has global manufacturing systems, a vast dealer network, brand recognition, quality control, and decades of experience managing complex vehicle production. Its hybrid technology remains a major commercial asset. Its ability to produce millions of vehicles reliably is difficult to replicate. BYD has a different advantage. It has speed, battery expertise, vertical integration, aggressive pricing, and a product development culture shaped inside China's intensely competitive EV market. Put those capabilities together, and the result can be dangerous for companies that have neither. That is why the Toyota-BYD relationship matters beyond Toyota and BYD. It sends a message to the rest of the automotive industry. A Japanese manufacturing giant is willing to collaborate deeply with a Chinese EV specialist because the competitive frontier has moved. The old assumption was that established automakers would develop the next generation of technology internally and then teach the rest of the industry how to manufacture it at scale. The emerging model may be the opposite. Specialists can develop critical technologies faster, while legacy manufacturers contribute manufacturing scale, safety systems, global distribution, and brand power. This creates a new question for Europe and the United States. What happens when Chinese EV technology becomes embedded inside the products of established Western and Japanese brands? The answer is complicated, because the supply chain becomes harder to separate into national categories. A battery can be designed by one company, manufactured by another, installed into a vehicle engineered by a third, and sold under a fourth company's brand. That is already visible in Toyota's collaboration with BYD, and it creates a geopolitical problem that tariffs alone cannot solve. Governments can raise the price of imported Chinese cars. They can restrict market access. They can subsidize domestic battery plants. They can encourage local manufacturing. But none of those policies automatically recreate the industrial knowledge that China has accumulated through years of intense EV competition. The most important asset may not be the battery itself. It may be the ecosystem around the battery. This is why Toyota's decision to work with BYD is so revealing. Toyota is not simply buying a cheaper component. It is connecting itself to a technological environment that has evolved extremely quickly. The BZ showed the first major public result. The later China-focused models showed that the collaboration was becoming part of a broader strategy. And BYD's battery technology continued appearing in Toyota-branded EV products, demonstrating how difficult it is to draw a clean line between Japanese and Chinese automotive capabilities. There is another important point. Toyota's partnership does not prove that BYD has defeated Toyota. It proves that the definition of competition has changed. In the internal combustion era, companies competed primarily through engines, transmissions, manufacturing scale, styling, reliability, and distribution. In the EV era, the battlefield expands into batteries, semiconductors, operating software, data, charging networks, power electronics, and supply chains. That makes partnerships more important, not less. A company can compete with another company in one area and depend on it in another. Toyota and BYD are competitors in the global vehicle market. At the same time, their engineers have worked together to develop vehicles. That contradiction is not a flaw in the system. It may be the defining feature of the new industry. And the timing matters. China's domestic EV market has become so competitive that Chinese automakers are increasingly looking overseas. In 2026, Chinese vehicle exports have continued to expand, while domestic demand has weakened, putting additional pressure on manufacturers to find global markets. Reuters reported in August 2026 that Chinese vehicle exports surged sharply, while Chinese brands were gaining ground in Europe and other markets. That means the technology Toyota once needed primarily to compete inside China is increasingly part of a global industrial contest. There is also a lesson in the geography of the partnership. The joint venture was established in Shenzhen, a city that represents the kind of industrial environment traditional automakers increasingly need to understand. Shenzhen is not simply a place where factories happen to be located. It is a dense technology ecosystem where suppliers, electronics companies, software developers, battery specialists, and vehicle manufacturers can operate within a short industrial distance of one another. That proximity compresses development cycles. For Toyota, this matters because electric vehicles reduce the number of mechanical components that once separated automakers from their suppliers. At the same time, they increase the importance of electronics and software. The competitive advantage can move toward companies that can coordinate those systems quickly. A partnership inside Shenzhen therefore gives Toyota something that cannot be measured only in the price of a battery. It gives the company a window into how China's EV industry actually works. And that may be the most historic part of the deal. The future of the automobile is not being designed in one country anymore. That decision carries risks. Technology dependence can become supply chain dependence. Supply chain dependence can become strategic vulnerability. And when the supplier is based in a country increasingly caught in geopolitical competition with the United States, Europe, and their allies, the commercial decision becomes inseparable from national policy. But refusing to cooperate has risks too. If a company refuses to learn from the fastest-moving competitors, it may protect its independence while losing its relevance. Toyota therefore faces a delicate balancing act. It must absorb Chinese EV expertise without becoming trapped by it. It must preserve Japanese manufacturing strengths while adapting to Chinese development speed. It must compete with BYD while learning from BYD. And it must do all of that while governments around the world are turning electric vehicles into a question of industrial sovereignty. That is why the Toyota BYD story is bigger than one sedan, one battery, or one joint venture. It is a snapshot of the moment when the global automobile industry began to reorganize itself around China. For a century, the center of automotive power was defined by the companies that mastered the engine and the factory. The next era may belong to whoever masters the battery, the software, and the supply chain. Toyota saw that shift early enough to make a deal. The question is what happens next, because once Toyota learned from BYD, the rest of the industry had to pay attention.